Good morning. Our opening words this morning come from a collection of readings called To Wake, to Rise. This one is by Maury Eldridge. It is called a gospel chorus. The gospel speaks to hope rising up from suffering. In the music, we are not alone. Each of our struggles is joined. A congregation of voices shares a battle with cancer, the loss of a parent, the struggles of a child, the massacre of children. From the depths of pain, we look toward joy, toward gratitude, toward what we find worthy of praise. In the church where my mother took me as a child, we sang, "Let my people go." I loved the singing. For the beauty of the earth. My father took us hiking. I seemed to prefer his cathedrals, the mountains where always I could see light shining through the cycle of our days. We sang as we climbed. I hear our imperative to go down and tell old Pharaoh with all our voices. For no matter how desperate, our situation, how deep, our debt, how grievous, our loss, how hateful our transgressions, we can always find something praiseworthy, something to make us grateful, some glimmer of hope, some promise of joy. That is the good news we sing. And will you please then join us in singing our opening song, If I Had a Hammer? It's in your insert.
So, hello? Yeah, there you go. So I could do this from the piano, right? Sorry, I think it's too square to do it from the piano. And I don't play guitar. So you know what? Stand up, because we're just going to do it. Is there anyone here who doesn't know Peter, Paul, and Mary? Okay. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out joining, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, if I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out a wager, I'd ring out a warning, I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, if I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out a warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, I got a hammer, and I've got a bell, I've got a song to sing, all over this land. It's a hammer of justice, it's a song of freedom, it's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. It's a hammer of justice, it's a bell of freedom, it's singing about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land.
Please remain standing for our unison affirmation. The words are printed in English and Spanish in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. Welcome to Sunday morning service at First Parish in Bedford. First Parish, as many of you know, is an energetic, justice-seeking, Unitarian Universalist congregation where we come together to love and care for each other and for our wider world. We welcome you this morning wherever you come from, however you identify, whomever you love. We welcome you with all the beliefs and doubts, the joys and sorrows, the hopes and regrets that you bring into this sacred space. And if you are new this morning, we extend a special welcome to you. We hope you'll stay and join us for fellowship and refreshments in the common room after the service to get to know us a little better. We also encourage newcomers to fill out one of the blue welcome cards that you'll find in the pew pocket, and you can put it in the collection basket when it comes around later. You will see that the holiday season is in full effect now. You can see that in our sanctuary where we have the murals that were created by our youngest on display. We also see that Mary and Joseph and the three magi are making their way across the ledge in the sanctuary closer to the front. We have our Advent wreath, and today is the last day of Hanukkah, so our menorah is on display. Also wanted to let you know, if you haven't had a chance to linger for a while with the panels from the AIDS quilt, this is the last Sunday that they will be on display, so please take some time to be with them. So going on today, there is a talkback with Reverend John Gibbons after his sermon at 11:30 in the Bacon Room. Also want to remind folks that we were gifted 20 free tickets to the musical 1776 being performed by the New Rep Theater in Watertown Wednesday at 10 a.m. If you are interested in those tickets, there are several still available. You just need to let John know today. Also want to remind people that the junior youth group is coordinating a project to aid the residents of the Lowell Transitional Living Center, and you can take a star off the tree that's in the common room and donate the specified item to support the good residents and families at the Lowell Transitional Living Center. And that's it for our announcements. John's got the time for all ages.
So, once upon a time, there was a preacher who went out on the town common, and the preacher preached about peace and love and hope and joy. And this preacher attracted hundreds of people to come and hear about peace and hope and love and joy. Maybe the preacher thought he was going to change the world. And there were, as I say, hundreds of who came to listen. And then the next day, well, the preacher did the same thing. And there were fewer people that came then. But still, the preacher continued to talk about peace and hope and love and joy. And then this went on, day after day. And There got to be fewer and fewer people gathering around to hear this same old message. And still, the preacher continued and talked and talked and talked and talked. And fewer and fewer people came until, well, pretty much nobody was paying attention at all. Nobody came. And when it got to that point, there were a couple of little kids who were watching what this guy was doing, and he was talking, as I say, to nobody. And a couple of kids said, hey, buddy, don't you notice that nobody is paying any attention to you? Nobody cares what you're saying. And at this point, the preacher said, well, at first, I preached to change the world. I was going to change everybody. I was going to change the world. But as time went on, I found that I really couldn't stop, because now I talk about peace and hope and love and joy so that the world does not change me. We come to this church for a lot of reasons, and sometimes we get a big head and we think, we're going to change the world around here, and, well, maybe we will sometimes. But there are also times when we gather here so that the world does not change us, so that our hearts stay open, so that we don't become cynical, so that we don't close our hearts, and that we continue to believe in hope and love and peace and joy. May the world not change us sometimes. Kids and teachers, I think, are about to go off to their classes, and as they do, we are going to sing Spirit of Life, which, if you do not know it, is at number 1, 2, 3 in our hymnal. Off you go. These are the words of James Baldwin. It is rare indeed that people give. Most people guard and keep. They suppose that it is they themselves and what they identify with themselves that they are guarding and keeping. Whereas what they are actually guarding and keeping is their system of reality and what they assume themselves to be. One can give nothing whatever without giving oneself, that is to say, risking oneself. If one cannot risk oneself, then one is simply incapable of giving. And so, again, we offer this opportunity to risk. Freely we have received, freely give for the work of this congregation. Within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will gratefully be received. I originally planned to deliver this Anvil sermon earlier in the fall. It turns out that my perspective since has changed somewhat, actually quite a bit. And so I hope you bear with me as I will end up in a quite different place than where I begin. These days, I'm feeling quite hammered by politics, by the state of our country and our world. Charles Blow is a New York Times columnist I admire, and since the election, he has not let his teeth let go of our president, and I admire his writing. And recently, Charles Blow wrote that he believes we're not reaching the end of a nightmare, but rather we are just entering one. I expect Trump to admit nothing, he writes. I also don't think that Trump would ever voluntarily leave office as Nixon did. I'm not even sure that he would willingly leave if he were impeached and convicted. Think of that. There is a very scary article in the current Atlantic magazine about what the president could do if he declares a state of emergency. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Blow goes on to say, I don't think any of this gets better. I don't believe that Trump's supporters would reverse. I don't believe that the facts Mueller presents will be considered unassailable. This will not get easier, but harder. The country is about to enter the crucible, Blow concludes. This test of our republic is without a true comparison, and we do not have a clear picture of how the test will resolve. But, I believe, damage is certain. As I say, I feel hammered. And that's why when I first read them earlier in the fall, I resonated with the words and deeds of the Catholic Bishop of Munster in the Rhineland during Nazism. The Nazis made plans to euthanize all mentally and physically challenged children and adults throughout Germany and the occupied territories. Bishop Clemens August von Galen urged his people to take all such children and adults out of church-sponsored schools and institutions and to bring them into their homes or hide them in their barns, to give them sanctuary. In a famous sermon on July 20th, 1941, von Galen urged Catholics to resistance. At this moment, he said, we are the anvil rather than the hammer. Other men, strangers, renegades are hammering us. Ask the blacksmith and hear what he says. The object which is forged on the anvil receives its form not alone from the hammer, but also from the anvil. The anvil cannot and need not strike back. It must only be firm, only be hard. However hard the hammer strikes, the anvil stands firmly and silently in place and will long continue to shape the objects forged upon it. If it is sufficiently tough and firm and hard, the anvil will last longer than the hammer. The anvil represents those who are unjustly imprisoned, those who are driven out and banished for no fault of their own. In these hammered days, we are called to be as solid as the anvil, that the world not change us. You know, there's a UU church in Chicago that in the 19th century was founded by a man named Robert Collyer. Collyer was a prominent social activist and reformer. He was a colleague of Jane Addams. But before becoming a minister, he was a blacksmith. In 1871, there was the Great Chicago Fire, which killed hundreds, burned 3.5 square miles, and left 100,000 people homeless. The fire destroyed Collier's church and his home, but his anvil survived. After the fire, he offered to take no salary from the church, but to earn his living at my anvil. And so, to this day, Collier's anvil sits prominently on that church's chancel, and their newsletter is called The Anvil. The anvil is a metaphor for resistance and what we are called to be and do in these bleak times. But then I did a bit of research about Bishop Von Galen. It turns out that although he resisted the rounding up of the disabled, he cared much less about the rounding up of Jews. For him, it was okay to round up the Jews and send them to the concentration camps. This fall, at one of our Jericho Walk protests at ICE headquarters in Burlington, I read that excerpt from Von Galen's Anvil sermon, and then I happened to be marching alongside a local rabbi. I told him of Von Galen's anti-Semitism, to which the rabbi shrugged and allowed that looking for saints is probably a fool's errand. Or, as Nancy said at the candle stand, maybe you can be a saint and have some remarkable flaws. Another of the saints of the Nazi resistance was the Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. You'll recall that it was he who famously confessed, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Popular as those words are today, Niemöller, it turns out, gave wholehearted support for Hitler during his climb to power. Niemöller voted for the Nazis in 1924 and again in 1933, and it wasn't until much later that Niemöller became disillusioned by the Nazis and he himself was arrested and sent to concentration camps. But even after the war, he continued to express anti-Semitic opinions. It was not until the 1950s that he composed his famous confession. While it is disappointing to learn of Von Galen's and Niemöller's inconsistency, my rabbi friend is correct that it is usually discouraging to worship saints. And yet, in Niemöller's case, we can celebrate the hopeful fact that despite all our ingrained prejudices, it remains possible for us, even us, to sometimes, eventually, change our mind. We ought not be deterred by our inconsistencies and our imperfections. Would that we give ourselves and one another permission to be human. But back to the anvil. What is our hard, hammer-resisting anvil? Were this a more orthodox church, you can bet the anvil would be God or Jesus or Scripture. And thanks to the internet in recent days, I've actually listened to a few such anvil-thumping Orthodox sermons. But I have forged no new faith in orthodoxy. So still I ask, what might be our Unitarian Universalist Anvil? I used to think that our 7 UU purposes were sort of blah, blah, soft, mundane, and ordinary. Here's what I want you to do. Take out your hymnals and let's read them together. They're written in the first few pages. It's about 4 pages into the hymnal on the left-hand side, and it says, "We covenant to affirm and promote." So let's just read these one at a time. First, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Who could not possibly believe in that? Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Everybody agrees with that, right? Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Truth and meaning. Hey, everybody believes in truth and meaning, right? The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. Within our congregations and in society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I used to wonder who could possibly disagree with any of that. And now we know that there are a great many people, some of them in very high places, who not only don't believe a word of that, but actually mock and trample and work to thwart and disempower each and every one of those principles. Those principles are not blah, blah, soft, mundane, or ordinary. They are more like a powerful anvil. Those principles will outlast many hammers, and on that radical foundation, a new world may yet be forged. But now, here comes the part where you'll need to bear with me. I believe every word I've said so far, but, I'm getting kind of tired of all this blacksmithing. Hammering, being hammered, forging, stoking that white-hot iron-bending hammer and tong-resisting fiery furnace. I want to step away from the anvil. I need to mop my brow and take a break. Michelle Alexander is the author of the very important, influential book, The New Jim Crow, which documents the persistence of racism in our nation and slavery by another name. Elsewhere in her writing, she also makes the case that Donald Trump is the resistance. We are not. She proposes a different metaphor. She quotes black scholar Vincent Harding, who said that the freedom struggle is like a river, sometimes powerful, tumultuous, and roiling with life, at other times meandering and turgid, covered with the ice and snow of seemingly endless winters, all too often streaked and running with blood. Alexander then says, Trump's election represents a surge of resistance to this rapidly swelling river, an effort to build not just a wall, but a dam. A new nation is struggling to be born, she says. A multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, egalitarian democracy in which every life and every voice truly matters. Yes, of course, she says, and here I'm paraphrasing her, we must resist the horrors we witness. But resistance is not all that we are about. Marchers in the freedom struggle sang, "We shall overcome." They did not chant, "We shall resist." Their goal was to overcome a racial caste system, to end it, and to create a new nation they called a beloved community. Those who opposed slavery were not resistors, they were abolitionists. And so this is Michelle Alexander's conclusion. Today, many of us in the movements to end mass deportation and mass incarceration do not want to simply resist those systems. We aim to end them and reimagine the meaning of justice in America. By the same token, many of those who are battling climate change and building movements for economic justice understand that merely tinkering with our political and economic systems will not end poverty or avert climate disaster, nor will mere resistance to the status quo. As the saying goes, what you resist persists. Another world is possible, but we can't achieve it through resistance alone. So, as I bring this sermon in for a landing, this is where you will really have to bear with me. Yes, let us hold fast to our principles and our purposes as to an anvil. But for a while, at least, let's step back from the anvil. Let's take off our smithy's apron. Let's give up on the veneration of saints. Let us accept one another's imperfections, mine, and I suppose yours as well. Let's not define ourselves by resistance. But then, to what may we aspire? I return again to the beloved community. I return once again to this liberating flame and to those 4 candles of hope and love and joy and peace. I suggest that over the next weeks and beyond, that we renew our hopes and aspirations and practice of being a beloved community. Within these walls and beyond, with our families, with our friends, and certainly, importantly, with strangers. There is a Celtic mystic named John O'Donohue whose writing I like. He says he can't believe in any of this stuff about creating community. I think the whole project of trying to build community is misplaced. He says, I think community is. It is ontologically there. And so, says O'Donohue, the project is more about awakening. When you talk about building community, you see, pretty soon you're swinging hammers on anvils, you're getting all hot and bothered and working up a sweat. For O'Donohue, community is something that is remembered or revealed or awakened in us because we are already, he says, dangerously involved with each other in an incredibly intimate but unseen way. That is what it means to be human. Community just is. We are each connected to every other thing. Community for O'Donohue is about love awakening in our lives. In the night of your heart, it is like the dawn breaking within you, where before there was anonymity, now there is intimacy. Where before there was fear, now there is courage. These holidays are an invitation for us to remember and to feel our connection to one another and to all that is. This is a time not to fear nightmares, but to dream dreams. Hope, love, joy, and peace are ours if we awaken to them, if we remember. Be intimate. Have courage. May we each remember that we are inherently born into the beloved community. We need only remember. A new world is struggling to be born. We'll hammer and get hammered back at our Anvil soon enough. And I'll tell you, when I first planned out this service, I had some Anvil hammering hymn for us to end with, and I scrapped that. We're going to sing something different. The Peace Not Past Our Understanding is number 164. You can sit down for this part. So there is a story about a kid who asks his mother what she wants for Hanukkah, what she wants for Christmas, what she wants for the solstice. And the mother says, well, I don't want anything. I want some peace and quiet. Peace and quiet is all I want. And so the kid says, all right, I'll go get you some peace and quiet. And the holiday arrives, and they're opening presents, and the kid says, hey, be sure to open that one. That one is the one that is for you. That's the one that has the gift in it that you wanted most. And so the mother looks at this package and shakes it a little bit to see what it might be, and how can there possibly be peace and quiet in there? But she goes along with it, and she opens it up. No heaven can come to us unless our hearts find rest in today. Take heaven. No peace lies in the future which is not hidden in this present little instance. Take peace. The gloom of the world is but a shadow. Behind it, yet within our reach, is joy. Take joy. Amen.